Sarah Martinez wiped down the espresso machine for the third time that morning, her movements precise and automatic after 6 months of working at Harbor Cafe. The small coffee shop overlooked the naval base, its large windows offering a clear view of the gray destroyers and aircraft carriers that dotted the harbor like sleeping giants. Most customers barely noticed her as she worked behind the counter, lost in their own conversations about deployment schedules, family back home, and the weight of service that seemed to follow every person in uniform who walked through those doors. At 24, Sarah had grown accustomed to being invisible. It was safer that way. The noise of the milk steamer and the gentle hum of conversation created a buffer between her and the world, a world she had once known intimately, but now observed from a careful distance. She moved through her shifts with quiet efficiency, remembering orders without being asked, knowing exactly how Lieutenant Commander Brooks liked his coffee, and that Petty Officer Williams always needed an extra shot on Mondays. The morning rush was tapering off when she noticed the commotion outside. A black sedan with government plates had pulled up to the cafe, followed by 2 more vehicles that screamed official business. Sarah's hands stilled on the cloth she was using to clean the counter, her heart beginning a familiar rhythm that she thought she had left behind years ago. Through the window, she watched as men in dress blues emerged from the vehicles, their posture unmistakably military despite the civilian setting. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah forced herself to look busy, arranging pastries that were already perfectly arranged. She could feel the change in the cafe's atmosphere immediately. Conversations grew quieter, more respectful. The casual laughter that had filled the space moments before was replaced by something heavier, more formal. She glanced up briefly and saw an older man in an admiral's uniform, his chest decorated with ribbons that told stories of decades of service, of battles fought, and of sacrifices made in service to country. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "What can I get for you today?" The Admiral approached the counter, his eyes scanning the menu board with the same intensity she imagined he brought to strategic planning. Behind him, 2 younger officers waited respectfully, their hands clasped behind their backs in perfect military bearing. The cafe had fallen almost completely silent now, the few remaining civilians sensing they were witnessing something significant, though they couldn't quite put their finger on what. "Coffee, black," the Admiral said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "And whatever these gentlemen would like." Sarah nodded, already reaching for the coffee pot. Her movements were economical, professional, but her mind was racing. There was something familiar about the Admiral's voice, something that tugged at memories she had carefully buried. As she poured the coffee, she found herself studying his face in quick glances, taking in the weathered features, the steel-gray hair, the eyes that seemed to see everything. The 2 junior officers ordered their drinks, and Sarah went about preparing them with the same quiet efficiency she brought to every interaction. She was known for her ability to remain calm under pressure, to handle even the most demanding customers with grace. The staff often joked that nothing could ruffle Sarah, that she had ice water in her veins. If only they knew how hard she worked to maintain that facade, how much effort it took to appear normal when every instinct screamed at her to run. As she handed the Admiral his coffee, their eyes met briefly. For a moment, she saw something flicker across his features, a look of recognition that was quickly suppressed. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, but she managed to maintain her composure, even offering a small, professional smile. "That'll be $8.50, she said, her voice not betraying the storm of emotions brewing inside her. The Admiral handed her a $10 bill, waving away the change with a gesture that was both generous and dismissive. "Keep it," he said, but his eyes remained fixed on her face, studying her with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the floor. Sarah busied herself with the register, counting out the change anyway and placing it in the tip jar, anything to avoid that penetrating stare. She could hear the officers settling into a corner booth, their conversation low and urgent, punctuated by the occasional rustle of papers and the soft clink of coffee cups against saucers. The next few customers passed in a blur. Sarah went through the motions of taking orders, making drinks, accepting payment, all while hyper-aware of the three men in the corner. She could feel the Admiral's eyes on her periodically, could sense him observing her movements, her interactions with other customers. It was like being under a microscope, and every instinct she had developed over the past 3 years told her to finish her shift and disappear. But she couldn't leave. This job was her lifeline, her anchor to a normal life that she had fought so hard to build. The cafe was more than just employment. It was her sanctuary, the place where she had learned to trust again, to find purpose in simple things like the perfect espresso or a customer's satisfied smile. Walking away would mean starting over again, and she wasn't sure she had the strength for another reinvention. An hour passed, then two. The Admiral and his companions showed no signs of leaving, their conversation continuing in hushed tones that suggested matters of significant importance. Sarah found herself straining to catch fragments of their discussion, old habits dying hard. But the words were too muffled, too carefully guarded. These were men who understood operational security, who knew how to conduct sensitive business even in civilian settings. During a brief lull in customers, Sarah allowed herself to really look at the Admiral. There was something about the set of his shoulders, the way he gestured when making a point, that stirred memories she thought she had successfully suppressed. She remembered briefings in sterile rooms, the weight of classified information, the constant awareness that lives hung in the balance of every decision. She remembered the respect in people's voices when they spoke to her, the trust that had been placed in her hands, and the devastating moment when it all came crashing down. The bell chimed again, and Sarah welcomed the distraction of new customers. A young couple, clearly tourists, approached the counter with the enthusiasm of people exploring a new city. She threw herself into their order with perhaps more energy than necessary, describing the local pastries in detail, recommending her personal favorites, anything to keep her mind occupied and her hands busy. But even as she worked, she remained acutely aware of the corner booth. She could feel the Admiral's attention like a physical weight, could sense him cataloging her every movement. It was unnerving and familiar at the same time, reminiscent of the scrutiny she had once lived under when every action was analyzed, every word weighed for its strategic value. The tourists left with their coffee and pastries, chattering excitedly about their plans for the day, and Sarah was left once again with the oppressive awareness of being watched. She began cleaning tasks that didn't need doing, reorganizing supplies that were already organized, anything to appear busy and normal while her mind raced with possibilities and fears. What did he want? How had he found her? And, perhaps most terrifyingly, what did his presence here mean for the carefully constructed life she had built? Sarah had learned to live with uncertainty, but this felt different. This felt like the past reaching out to reclaim her, to drag her back into a world she had fought so hard to escape. The afternoon wore on, and still the three men remained. Their conversation had evolved, growing more animated at times, more subdued at others. Papers were spread across the table, occasionally passed between them for examination. Sarah caught glimpses of official seals, of documents that carried the weight of government authority, and each glimpse sent another spike of anxiety through her chest. As closing time approached, Sarah found herself hoping they would simply leave, that whatever business had brought them here would conclude naturally and allow her to process this encounter in private. But as she began the closing routine, wiping down tables and chairs, the Admiral stood and approached the counter once more. "Excellent coffee," he said, his tone conversational, but his eyes sharp with intelligence. "I understand you've been working here for several months now." It wasn't a question, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. He had been asking about her, investigating her background. The realization hit her like a physical blow, confirming her worst fears about why he was here. "Yes, sir," she replied, falling back on military courtesy before she could stop herself. The formality slipped out naturally, a remnant of her previous life that she quickly tried to cover. "We appreciate your business." The Admiral's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes, a confirmation of what he had already suspected. "Sarah Martinez," he said quietly, and her blood turned to ice. "Though I believe that wasn't always your name." The words hung in the air between them, like an accusation, or perhaps an invitation. Sarah's hands trembled as she continued cleaning the counter, her mind racing through possible responses, possible escape routes, possible explanations that might preserve the life she had built here. "I'm sorry," she said carefully, "but I think you might have me confused with someone else." The Admiral studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost gentle, but no less intense. "Phoenix," he said quietly, and the word hit Sarah like a physical blow. "We need to talk." The cleaning cloth fell from Sarah's nerveless fingers. Phoenix, her call sign from another life, from a time when she had been someone else entirely, someone whose existence was classified at levels that most people couldn't even imagine. No one was supposed to know that name anymore. No one was supposed to remember the woman who had carried it. The cafe suddenly felt too small, too exposed. Sarah's carefully constructed world began to crumble around her as she stared into the Admiral's knowing eyes. 3 years of hiding, 3 years of building a new identity, 3 years of convincing herself that she was safe, and it had all been an illusion. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, but even as the words left her lips, she knew it was useless. The truth was written across her face, in the way her hands shook, in the barely controlled panic that threatened to overwhelm her. The Admiral reached into his jacket and withdrew a small photograph, placing it face down on the counter between them. "Look at it," he said gently. "Please." Sarah stared at the back of the photograph, knowing that whatever was on the other side would change everything. Her hand moved as if of its own accord, fingers trembling as she turned the image over. It was her, but not the her that existed now, not the quiet barista who made perfect lattes and remembered everyone's order. This was Phoenix, standing in dress uniform beside the Admiral himself, both of them younger, both of them wearing the confident expressions of people who believed they were making a difference in the world. In the background, she could see the familiar outline of a government building, could almost smell the recycled air and floor wax that had been the constants of her former life. "That was taken 4 years ago," the Admiral said quietly. 2 months before everything went wrong. Sarah's vision blurred, and she realized she was crying. The tears came without permission, carrying with them all the grief and guilt and terror she had worked so hard to bury. In that moment, standing behind the counter of a small cafe, surrounded by the detritus of her normal life, she was no longer Sarah Martinez, simple barista. She was Phoenix again, and Phoenix had blood on her hands. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why now?" The Admiral's expression softened, and for a moment he looked less like a military commander and more like a father figure, someone who understood the cost of the choices they had all made. "Because we need you," he said simply. "Because the world needs Phoenix." Sarah looked around the cafe, at the familiar surroundings that had become her sanctuary, at the espresso machine she had mastered, at the tip jar filled with the generosity of regular customers who had come to trust and appreciate her. This was her life now, small and safe and honest. This was who she had chosen to become. But choice, she was beginning to remember, had always been an illusion for people like her. Phoenix had never been allowed to choose, and apparently neither would Sarah Martinez. The Admiral waited patiently as she struggled with the weight of recognition and memory. Behind him, his companions had risen from their table, their posture alert but respectful, understanding that they were witnessing a moment of profound significance. 3 years, Sarah said finally, her voice stronger now, steadied by anger and resignation in equal measure. I gave you 3 years of silence. 3 years of staying dead. And we honor that, the Admiral replied. We let you disappear, let you build this life. But circumstances have changed. There's a situation that requires your particular expertise. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. My expertise got 6 people killed. My expertise nearly started a war. Your expertise also prevented something far worse, the Admiral countered firmly. And you know it. The words hung between them, carrying the weight of classified knowledge and shared history. Sarah did know it, had known it even as she watched her world collapse around her, even as she was forced to disappear into the protection of anonymity. The mission had been successful in ways that would never be publicly acknowledged, but the cost had been devastating to everyone involved. I can't, she said, shaking her head. I won't. That person is dead. Phoenix, the Admiral said, and this time the call sign was gentle, almost pleading. People are going to die if we don't act. Good people, innocent people, and you're the only one who can stop it. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a familiar cloak. This was how it had always been, the terrible burden of being uniquely qualified for tasks that no one should have to undertake. She had thought she was free of it, had believed that 3 years of anonymity had earned her the right to a simple life. But the world, it seemed, had other plans. When she opened her eyes again, the Admiral was watching her with a mixture of sympathy and determination. He understood what he was asking of her, understood the price she had already paid and the price she would pay again. But he was asking anyway, because sometimes the needs of many outweighed the desires of one. Tell me, Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of surrender. Tell me what's happened. The Admiral glanced around the cafe, noting the few remaining customers who were pretending not to eavesdrop on their conversation. Not here, he said. There's a car outside. Come with us, and I'll explain everything. Sarah looked around the cafe one more time, memorizing the details of a life she was about to leave behind. The afternoon light streaming through the windows, the comfortable wear patterns on the floor, the slight wobble in the third table from the left that she had learned to work around. Tomorrow, someone else would stand behind this counter, would learn the regulars' orders, would build relationships with the customers who had become like family to her. I need to close up, she said finally. Clean the machines, lock the register. Give me 10 minutes. The Admiral nodded, understanding the importance of ritual, of completing one phase of life before beginning another. We'll wait, he said. As Sarah went through the familiar motions of closing the cafe, she felt Phoenix stirring within her, awakening from a sleep that had lasted 3 years. The transformation wasn't complete yet, but it had begun, and she knew there would be no turning back. The barista named Sarah Martinez was already becoming a memory, fading like smoke in the face of a summons that could not be ignored. The bell chimed one last time as she locked the door behind them, the sound carrying a finality that made her heart ache. She had built something beautiful here, something normal and peaceful and honest. Now it was time to return to a world where nothing was honest, where peace was always temporary, and where beauty existed only in the spaces between betrayals. The Admiral waited beside the black sedan, his expression patient but urgent. Behind him, the naval base stretched into the distance, a reminder of the world she had thought she had left behind. As Sarah approached the car, she felt the last traces of her civilian identity slipping away, replaced by the cold clarity that had once made her legendary in circles that officially didn't exist. Admiral, she said, her voice steady now, professional. Where are we going? He opened the car door for her, a gesture that was both courteous and ominous. Langley, he said simply. There are people who need to brief you on the situation. Sarah nodded and slipped into the back seat, noting automatically the bulletproof glass, the communication equipment, the small details that marked this as a vehicle designed for serious business. As the car pulled away from the curb, she didn't look back at the cafe. Looking back, she had learned, was a luxury that people like her couldn't afford. The transformation was complete now. Sarah Martinez, The quiet barista who made excellent coffee and asked no questions was gone. In her place sat Phoenix, a ghost who had apparently been called back to life, ready once again to dance with shadows and secrets in service of a greater good that she hoped still existed. The Admiral settled beside her, already reaching for a secured briefcase that would contain the details of whatever crisis had necessitated her resurrection. As the car merged into traffic, beginning the journey that would take her back into the heart of the intelligence community, Phoenix allowed herself one moment of grief for the simple life she was leaving behind. Then, she straightened her shoulders and prepared to listen, to learn, and to once again become the weapon she had been trained to be. The world needed saving, and apparently, she was the one who would have to do it. The secured briefing room at Langley felt like stepping back in time. Phoenix found herself surrounded by the familiar trappings of her former life. The windowless walls, the faint hum of electronic countermeasures, the particular brand of fluorescent lighting that seemed designed to leach the life from everything it touched. She had forgotten how sterile these spaces felt, how they seemed to exist outside of time and geography, creating a pocket universe where only the mission mattered. Director James Kovacs stood at the head of the conference table, his appearance unchanged despite the 3 years that had passed since Phoenix had last seen him. He was still the same lean, silver-haired man who had recruited her from military intelligence, who had shaped her into the operative she had become. His eyes held the same intensity that had once inspired such loyalty in her, and she felt an unwelcome flutter of the old connection. "Phoenix," he said, using her call sign as if the years of separation had never happened. "Thank you for coming." The phrase was polite, even formal, but they both knew she hadn't had a choice. People like Phoenix were never truly retired. They were simply placed on standby until the world needed them again. She took her seat at the table, noting the other faces around her, some familiar, some new, all bearing the particular expression of intelligence professionals dealing with a crisis that threatened to spiral beyond their control. "Before we begin," Phoenix said, her voice carrying the professional distance she had learned to maintain in these rooms, "I need to understand something." The agreement was that Sarah Martinez would be allowed to live a normal life indefinitely. That was the deal in exchange for my silence about Operation Nightfall. Director Kovacs' expression didn't change, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested her words had hit their mark. "Circumstances have changed," he said simply. "The threat level has escalated beyond our normal operational capacity." A woman Phoenix didn't recognize leaned forward, her dark hair pulled back in a severe style favored by senior analysts. "Dr. Elena Vasquez," she said by way of introduction, "Deputy Director of Intelligence. What we're about to show you is classified at the highest levels. The President himself has authorized your recall to active status." Phoenix felt a chill run down her spine. Presidential authorization meant this was bigger than anything she had dealt with before, bigger than the operations that had defined her career. She had thought Operation Nightfall was the apex of international crisis management. Apparently, she had been naive. The lights dimmed, and a large screen descended from the ceiling. The first image that appeared was a satellite photograph of what looked like an industrial facility in a mountainous region. Phoenix studied it with the practiced eye of someone trained to extract intelligence from visual data, noting the security perimeters, the vehicle patterns, the subtle signs of heavy activity. "This is the Kestrel Research Facility, DR. Vasquez began, located in the Carpathian Mountains, approximately 40 kilometers from the Romanian border. Officially, it's a private biotechnology company working on agricultural improvements. Unofficially, it's the site of research that could fundamentally alter the balance of global power." The image changed, zooming in to show more detail. Phoenix could see the underground entrances, the sophisticated air filtration systems, the power grid that suggested energy consumption far beyond what any agricultural research would require. This was a weapons facility, she was certain, but the type of weapons remained unclear. 3 months ago, Director Kovac continued, "We lost contact with an asset who had been monitoring activities at Kestrel. Dr. Michael Chun, a biochemist who had been feeding us intelligence about their research programs. His last transmission indicated that they had achieved a breakthrough in synthetic biology that posed an immediate threat to global security. Phoenix studied the photograph more carefully, looking for the details that might tell her what kind of threat they were dealing with. Biological weapons? She asked, though something about the facility's setup suggested it was more complex than that. Worse, Dr. Vasquez said, advancing to the next slide. We believe they have successfully weaponized a form of synthetic organism that can target specific genetic markers. In simple terms, they may have created a biological weapon that can be programmed to kill people based on their ancestry. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Phoenix had dealt with many horrors in her career, had seen the worst that human ingenuity could devise, but this was something new. The implications were staggering. The potential for genocide on a scale that defied comprehension. That's impossible, Phoenix said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't true. Science had advanced rapidly in the years since her retirement, and what had once been science fiction was increasingly becoming operational reality. We thought so too, Director Kovac replied, until we intercepted communications suggesting that Kestrel is preparing to auction their technology to the highest bidder. The sale is scheduled to take place in 6 days, a location we haven't been able to identify. Phoenix felt the familiar weight of operational pressure settling on her shoulders. 6 days was not much time to plan and execute an operation of this magnitude, especially when they were dealing with unknown technology and hostile actors of uncertain capability. Who's behind Kestrel? She asked, already beginning to think through the intelligence requirements and operational challenges. A new face joined the briefing, a younger man with the intense demeanor of someone who lived and breathed field intelligence. Agent Marcus Torres, he introduced himself. I've been running the surveillance operation on Kestrel for the past 8 months. The facility is owned by a shell corporation that traces back to Viktor Petrov, a former Soviet bioweapons researcher who disappeared after the collapse of the USSR. Phoenix knew the name. Petrov had been a legend in intelligence circles, a brilliant scientist who had worked on some of the most horrifying weapons programs in human history. His disappearance in the early 1990s had been one of the great unsolved mysteries of the post-Cold War period. If he was behind Kestrel, the situation was even more dangerous than she had initially thought. Petrov is 73 years old, Agent Torres continued. But our intelligence suggests he's not the operational leader. He's been training a successor, someone who has both the scientific knowledge and the business acumen to take this technology global. The screen changed again, this time showing a photograph of a woman in her 40s with striking features and cold, intelligent eyes. Phoenix studied the image, noting the expensive clothing, the confident posture, the subtle signs of someone accustomed to wielding significant power. Dr. Anya Volkov, Dr. Vasquez said, Petrov's protege and, we believe, the current head of operations at Kestrel. She has advanced degrees in biochemistry and genetics from Moscow University, and her psychological profile suggests she has no moral qualms about the applications of her research. Phoenix memorized the face, already beginning to construct a mental profile of her potential adversary. Dr. Volkov looked like someone who would be formidable both intellectually and operationally, the kind of opponent who would anticipate traditional intelligence approaches and plan accordingly. What happened to Dr. Chun? Phoenix asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Director Kovac's expression darkened. His body was found 3 weeks ago in a hotel room in Bucharest. Official cause of death was heart failure, but the forensic analysis suggested he had been exposed to an unknown biological agent. The Romanian authorities are treating it as a natural death. The implications were clear. Dr. Chun had been eliminated using the very technology he had been reporting on, a demonstration of Kestrel's capabilities that served as both revenge and warning. It also suggested that Dr. Volkov was willing to use her weapons for personal purposes, which made her even more dangerous. So you need me to infiltrate Kestrel and either steal or destroy their research, Phoenix said, already seeing the shape of the mission that was being constructed around her. It's more complicated than that, Agent Torres said, pulling up a new set of documents. We've learned that the auction isn't for the technology itself, but for specific targeting packages. Dr. Volkov has apparently created biological weapons tailored to eliminate specific ethnic groups, and she's planning to sell them to the highest bidder. Phoenix felt sick. The idea of weapons designed to commit genocide was horrifying enough, but the thought that they would be sold like commodities at an auction was almost beyond comprehension. This wasn't warfare. It was the industrialization of ethnic cleansing. How many targeting packages? She asked, dreading the answer. At least 12, Dr. Vasquez replied. We've identified genetic markers for various ethnic groups from around the world. If this auction proceeds, we could see conflicts that make the Rwanda genocide look like a minor skirmish. Phoenix studied the faces around the table, noting the mixture of determination and fear that she remembered from the most serious operations of her career. This was the kind of threat that intelligence agencies existed to prevent, the nightmare scenario that justified every morally ambiguous decision they made. What about international cooperation? She asked. The UN, NATO, other allied intelligence services? Director Kovac shook his head. The political situation is too complex. Half the potential buyers at this auction are state actors that we can't confront directly without triggering a larger conflict. This has to be handled quietly, through channels that officially don't exist. Phoenix understood. This was why they had brought her back, why they needed someone with her particular skill set. This wasn't a job for uniformed military or traditional intelligence operatives. This required someone who could work in the shadows, who could operate without official sanction or support, who could do what needed to be done regardless of the personal cost. Timeline? She asked, already beginning to shift into operational planning mode. The auction is in 6 days, Agent Torres said. We've identified the general region where we believe it will take place, but we haven't pinpointed the exact location. We need someone inside Kestrel's operations to provide us with the final details. Phoenix studied the intelligence package more carefully, looking for operational opportunities and potential weaknesses. Dr. Volkov's personal security. Extensive, Agent Torres replied. Former Spetsnaz operatives, private military contractors, electronic surveillance systems. She's paranoid, but not without reason. She knows that every major intelligence service in the world would love to eliminate her. The challenge was becoming clearer. This wouldn't be a simple infiltration or assassination. Dr. Volkov was too well protected, too cautious, and too valuable to her organization to be eliminated through conventional means. Phoenix would need to find another approach, something that would allow her to get close enough to gather the intelligence they needed without triggering the extensive security measures. What about her personal life? Phoenix asked. Family, relationships, interests outside of her work? Dr. Vasquez consulted her notes. She's unmarried, no children that we know of. Her only apparent passion outside of her research is classical music. She's a patron of several European orchestras and attends performances regularly when she's not at the facility. Phoenix felt the first stirring of an operational idea. Music could be an avenue of approach, a way to make contact in a setting where Dr. Volkov might be more relaxed, less guarded. It would require extensive preparation and a cover identity that could withstand scrutiny, but it was possible. I'll need a full intelligence package, she said, her tone becoming more businesslike. Everything you have on Volkov, Petrov, the facility, the security arrangements, the auction participants. I'll also need a new identity, one that can pass deep background checks. Director Kovac nodded, already reaching for a secure phone. We've anticipated that. There's a cover identity being prepared that will position you as a wealthy art collector with interests in both classical music and biotechnology investments. It should give you access to the circles where Volkov moves when she's not at the facility. Phoenix approved of the approach. The best cover identities were built around kernels of truth, and she actually did have knowledge of both art and biotechnology from her previous operations. The challenge would be maintaining the cover while gathering the intelligence they needed and positioning herself for whatever action would ultimately be required. "Support team?" she asked. "Minimal," Agent Torres said. "This has to be a solo operation to maintain deniability. You'll have communication support and emergency extraction capabilities, but no operational backup inside the target area." Phoenix had expected as much. Operations of this sensitivity were almost always conducted with minimal support, relying on the individual operative skills and judgment rather than team coordination. It increased the risk exponentially, but it also reduced the chance of compromise or political complications. Weapons and equipment. Standard loadout, plus some specialized items tailored to the biotechnology threat, Dr. Vasquez said. Protective equipment, detection devices, and countermeasures for biological weapons. We're also providing you with a vaccination package that should protect you against the known strains of weaponized organisms. Phoenix noted the qualifier. Protection against known strains meant there might be unknown variants that could still pose a threat. She would be walking into a situation where the very air she breathed could potentially be lethal, where a handshake or shared drink could deliver a death sentence programmed to her specific genetic code. "When do I leave?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would be sooner than she would like. "Tomorrow morning," Director Kovacs said. "The cover identity will be fully established by then, complete with financial records, social media presence, and a documented history of art acquisitions. You'll fly to Vienna under your new identity and begin making contact with the cultural organizations where Volkov is known to appear." Phoenix nodded, already beginning to mentally prepare for the transition from her quiet life as a barista to the high-stakes world of international espionage. The transformation was always jarring, like putting on clothes that had once fit perfectly, but now felt strange after years of disuse. "There's one more thing," Dr. Vasquez said, her tone suggesting that whatever was coming would be particularly difficult to hear. "We have reason to believe that someone inside our organization has been feeding information to Kestrel. Dr. Chen's death was too convenient, too perfectly timed to be coincidental." The words hit Phoenix like a physical blow. The possibility of a mole inside the intelligence community added another layer of complexity and danger to an already nearly impossible mission. She would not only have to worry about Dr. Volkov and her security team, but also about the possibility that her own organization had been compromised. "Suspects?" she asked, though she knew that information would be compartmentalized at the highest levels. "We're still investigating," Director Kovacs said, which Phoenix understood to mean that they had suspicions but no proof, or that the suspected individual was too highly placed to move against without absolute certainty. Phoenix absorbed this information, adding it to the growing list of variables she would need to account for in her operational planning. A mole inside the intelligence community could compromise every aspect of her mission, from her cover identity to her communication protocols to her extraction plans. "Does my cover identity account for the possibility of inside intelligence?" she asked. "Yes," Dr. Vasquez assured her. "The identity has been created through a separate channel, with access limited to the absolute minimum number of personnel. As far as anyone else knows, you're still Sarah Martinez, quietly serving coffee and living a civilian life." The briefing continued for another 2 hours, covering operational details, communication protocols, and contingency plans. Phoenix absorbed it all with the focused intensity that had once made her legendary in these circles, her mind already beginning to construct the framework of an operation that would either save countless lives or cost her own. As the briefing concluded and the other personnel began to file out of the room, Director Kovacs approached her with the expression of someone about to deliver news that he would rather not share. "Phoenix," he said quietly, "there's something else you need to know. The President has authorized the use of any necessary force to prevent this technology from reaching the market. That includes tactical nuclear weapons if the situation escalates beyond conventional capabilities." The implications were staggering. The threat posed by Kestrel's research was significant enough that the United States government was prepared to risk nuclear escalation to prevent it from spreading. Phoenix had operated under many different levels of authorization, but she had never been part of a mission where nuclear weapons were even a consideration. "How much time before that option is exercised?" she asked. 72 hours after the auction begins," Director Kovac replied. "If we can't prevent the sale through conventional means, the facility and everything in a 5-mile radius will be eliminated." Phoenix felt the weight of ultimate responsibility settling on her shoulders. She wasn't just responsible for stopping the auction. She was responsible for ensuring that nuclear weapons weren't used in the heart of Europe, with all the political and humanitarian consequences that would follow. "Understood," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was being asked to undertake. Director Kovac handed her a sealed envelope. "Your new identity documents and initial briefing materials. You'll receive the full operational package tomorrow morning before departure." Phoenix took the envelope, feeling its weight both physical and symbolic. Inside was everything she would need to transform once again, to become someone new in service of a mission that could determine the future of human conflict. As she prepared to leave the briefing room, Phoenix allowed herself one final moment of reflection on the life she was leaving behind. Sarah Martinez had been happy serving coffee, had found peace in the simple rhythms of civilian life. But Phoenix had always known that peace was temporary, that the world would eventually call her back to service. The cafe seemed like a lifetime away now, a beautiful dream that had been interrupted by the harsh realities of a world where brilliant scientists could create weapons designed to eliminate entire ethnic groups, where the technology of genocide could be auctioned to the highest bidder like any other commodity. Tomorrow, she would begin the transformation back into the operative she had once been. Tonight, she would allow herself to grieve for Sarah Martinez, who had deserved better than to be a fleeting interlude between wars. As Phoenix left Langley and began the journey back to her apartment for one final night of civilian life, she carried with her the knowledge that she was humanity's best hope of preventing a catastrophe that could reshape the nature of warfare itself. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, but it was also familiar. She was Phoenix, and the world was about to burn. Her job was to rise from the ashes and ensure that something worth saving remained when the fire finally died. Isabella Marchetti adjusted her pearl necklace as she stepped out of the black Mercedes in front of the Musikverein Concert Hall in Vienna. The transformation from Phoenix to Isabella had taken 18 hours of intensive preparation, but as she walked up the marble steps in her perfectly tailored evening gown, she embodied everything about her cover identity. Wealthy Italian art collector, patron of the arts, and recent investor in biotechnology companies with a particular interest in Eastern European ventures. The Vienna Philharmonic was performing Brahms tonight, and, according to intelligence reports, Dr. Anya Volkov would be in attendance. This would be Phoenix's first opportunity to make visual contact with her target, to study the woman who held the key to preventing a biological holocaust that could reshape the world. Inside the magnificent concert hall, Phoenix allowed herself a moment to appreciate the stunning architecture and the quiet sophistication of the audience. These were people for whom culture was not entertainment, but identity, who moved through the world with the confidence that came from generational wealth and social position. She needed to become one of them, to fade seamlessly into this environment where Volkov felt safe enough to relax her guard. During the intermission, Phoenix made her way to the Patrons' Lounge, an exclusive space where Vienna's cultural elite gathered to see and be seen. The conversation was conducted in multiple languages, flowing seamlessly between German, French, and English as people discussed upcoming exhibitions, recent acquisitions, and the political events that affected the art market. Phoenix joined these conversations naturally, her cover identity providing her with enough genuine knowledge to hold her own among true connoisseurs. It was there that she first saw Dr. Anya Volkov in person. The scientist stood near the windows overlooking the Ringstrasse, engaged in quiet conversation with an elderly man who Phoenix recognized from her briefing materials as a prominent Austrian banker. Volkov was smaller than she had appeared in photographs, but there was an intensity to her presence that commanded attention even in a room full of accomplished people. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than most people made in a year, and her silver jewelry was understated but clearly expensive. Phoenix studied her target with the practiced eye of a predator, noting the subtle signs of constant vigilance that marked Volkov as someone who lived with the knowledge that she had enemies. The way her eyes scanned the room periodically, the manner in which she positioned herself with a clear view of all entrances, the almost imperceptible bulge under her left arm that suggested she was carrying a concealed weapon. Moving closer required patience and opportunity. Phoenix couldn't simply approach Volkov directly. That would be too obvious, too suspicious. Instead, she began to orbit the scientist's social circle, inserting herself into conversations with Volkov's acquaintances, gradually building the kind of social credibility that would make an introduction seem natural. The opportunity came when the banker mentioned a recent acquisition of medieval manuscripts by the Austrian National Library. Phoenix had studied medieval illumination as part of her art history cover, and she offered an informed opinion about the manuscript's provenance that impressed the small group gathered around them. When Volkov expressed interest in the topic, the banker naturally introduced them. Dr. Volkov, I'd like you to meet Isabella Marchetti. She's an art collector from Milan with extensive knowledge of medieval manuscripts. Volkov extended her hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. A pleasure to meet you, Ms. Marchetti. I confess my own interests run more toward the sciences, but I have great appreciation for those who preserve our cultural heritage. Phoenix shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that suggested Volkov spent time with her hands in laboratory equipment despite her elegant appearance. The intersection between science and art has always fascinated me, Phoenix replied, her Italian accent perfect after years of practice. I've been following developments in biotechnology with great interest, particularly the work being done in Eastern Europe. Something flickered in Volkov's eyes at the mention of biotechnology, a brief moment of heightened attention that confirmed Phoenix was on the right track. Indeed, most art collectors find the sciences rather dry. Not when they're changing the world, Phoenix said with a carefully calculated smile. I believe we're on the verge of breakthroughs that will fundamentally alter human potential. It's as revolutionary as the invention of perspective in Renaissance painting. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Phoenix carefully probing Volkov's interests while maintaining her cover as a wealthy dilettante with more money than scientific understanding. She detected genuine intelligence behind Volkov's polite facade, along with the kind of arrogance that came from knowing secrets that could reshape civilization. When the second half of the concert began, Phoenix had successfully established herself in Volkov's social circle and learned that the scientist would be attending a private gallery opening the following evening. More importantly, she had confirmed that Volkov was conducting business in Vienna, meeting with potential buyers and investors in settings where she could assess their seriousness and financial capabilities. The next day, Phoenix spent hours studying intelligence reports and preparing for the gallery opening. The event was being hosted by a contemporary art dealer who specialized in works that explored the relationship between technology and human experience. It was exactly the kind of venue where someone like Isabella Marchetti would be expected to appear and where Volkov might be more willing to discuss her work openly. The gallery opening was a crush of Vienna's artistic and intellectual elite gathered around works that challenged conventional understanding of human identity and technological progress. Phoenix moved through the crowd with practiced ease, discussing the pieces with genuine enthusiasm while keeping track of Volkov's movements and conversations. She found her target standing before a massive installation that used DNA sequencing data to generate visual patterns, creating art from the fundamental building blocks of life itself. Volkov was studying the piece with the intense focus of a scientist, seeing patterns and possibilities that others might miss. Fascinating how artists are beginning to work with genetic data, Phoenix said, approaching casually. Though I wonder if they truly understand the implications of what they're representing. Volkov turned, recognizing Phoenix from the previous evening. Ms. Marchetti, I didn't expect to see you here. Art and science have always been connected, Phoenix replied, gesturing toward the installation. Da Vinci studied anatomy, Vermeer understood optics. Today's artists are working with genetics and biotechnology. But do they understand the responsibility that comes with such knowledge? Volkov asked, her tone suggesting deeper currents of thought. Phoenix sensed an opportunity to probe deeper. You sound like someone who's grappled with that question personally. Volkov studied her for a long moment, as if weighing how much to reveal to this wealthy art collector who claimed interest in biotechnology. In my field, we deal with forces that could benefit humanity enormously or destroy it completely. The line between advancement and catastrophe is often thinner than people realize. Your field being? Genetic research, Volkov said carefully. I work for a private institute that explores applications of synthetic biology. Phoenix felt her pulse quicken. This was the closest Volkov had come to discussing her real work, and it suggested she was beginning to trust Isabella Marchetti enough to hint at the true nature of her research. That must be extraordinary work, Phoenix said. The potential to literally rewrite the code of life itself. Yes, Volkov agreed, her eyes still fixed on the DNA-based installation. But with that power comes the question of who decides how it should be used. Governments? Scientists? The market? The question hung between them, and Phoenix understood that Volkov was wrestling with moral questions even as she pursued research that could enable genocide. It suggested a complex personality, someone who understood the implications of her work but had chosen to proceed anyway. In the art world, Phoenix said carefully, we've learned that the most valuable pieces often come from the most controversial artists. The market has a way of determining value based on rarity and impact rather than conventional morality. Volkov's expression sharpened slightly, and Phoenix wondered if she had pushed too hard, revealed too much interest in the commercial applications of genetic research. But after a moment, the scientist nodded thoughtfully. An interesting perspective, Volkov said. Perhaps we should continue this conversation in a more private setting. Are you free for dinner tomorrow evening? Phoenix felt a surge of triumph mixed with apprehension. She had successfully cultivated Volkov's interest, but now she would be moving into a more dangerous phase of the operation. Private meetings meant fewer witnesses, greater scrutiny, and more opportunity for her cover to be exposed. I'd be delighted, she said with the enthusiasm of Isabella Marchetti, while mentally preparing for the challenges that lay ahead. The dinner took place at Zoom Schwartz and Camille, an exclusive restaurant favored by Vienna's elite for its discretion and excellent wine selection. Phoenix arrived early and selected a table that offered good sight lines and multiple exits, old habits asserting themselves even in her civilian cover. Volkov appeared precisely on time, dressed in understated elegance that spoke of confidence and wealth. She had chosen this venue carefully, Phoenix realized, somewhere public enough to feel safe but private enough to have sensitive conversations without being overheard. The early part of the dinner passed pleasantly enough, with conversation ranging across art, science, and the cultural differences between Italy and Austria. Volkov was an engaging dinner companion when she chose to be, displaying a breadth of knowledge that extended far beyond her scientific expertise. Phoenix found herself genuinely enjoying the intellectual sparring, even as she remained focused on her operational objectives. It was over the main course that Volkov began to probe more deeply into Isabella's background and interests. Your investment in biotechnology companies, Volkov said casually, cutting into her veal with surgical precision. Are you looking for specific applications, or simply following market trends? Phoenix had prepared for this line of questioning, building her cover story around enough truth to withstand scrutiny. I'm interested in technologies that could fundamentally change human capabilities, she said. Not the incremental improvements that most companies pursue, but breakthrough applications that could reshape entire societies. Such applications often come with significant ethical considerations, Volkov observed, watching Phoenix's reaction carefully. Ethics are a luxury for people who aren't facing existential threats, Phoenix replied, channeling the cynicism of someone who had seen enough of the world to abandon naive idealism. When survival is at stake, moral considerations become secondary. Volkov's eyes glinted with something that might have been approval. You sound like someone who's faced such choices. Phoenix allowed a shadow of pain to cross her features, drawing on genuine memories of operations that had required morally ambiguous decisions. I lost family in the Yugoslav wars, she said quietly. Ethnic cleansing carried out by people who believed they were protecting their own survival. It taught me that the world is a more dangerous place than most people want to acknowledge. The lie came easily, built around historical events that Isabella Marchetti would have experienced as a young woman. But Phoenix found herself disturbed by how readily she could access the emotional truth behind the fabrication, how her own experiences with loss and moral compromise gave weight to the fictional identity. I'm sorry, Volkov said, and for a moment her professional facade cracked enough to reveal genuine sympathy. Such experiences tend to clarify one's perspective on what really matters. They do, Phoenix agreed, which is why I'm interested in technologies that could prevent such tragedies. If genetics can be used to target specific populations for elimination, the same science could potentially be used to protect vulnerable groups. She was walking a tightrope now, probing Volkov's research while maintaining the appearance of someone exploring defensive rather than offensive applications. The scientist studied her with renewed intensity, as if seeing Isabella Marchetti in a new light. Protection through genetic manipulation, Volkov mused. An interesting concept, though one would need extensive resources and sophisticated laboratory capabilities to pursue such research. Resources I might be able to provide, Phoenix said, to the right research team working on the right applications. Volkov set down her wine glass with deliberate care, her movements suggesting someone who had reached a decision point. Isabella, may I ask you something directly? Phoenix felt her pulse quicken, recognizing the moment when cover identities were either accepted or exposed. Of course. Are you truly an art collector interested in genetic research as a philanthropic endeavor, or are you something else entirely? The question hung between them like a blade, and Phoenix understood that her answer would determine whether this operation continued or ended with her cover blown and her life in immediate danger. Volkov's hand had moved closer to her purse, where Phoenix suspected she kept a weapon or communication device. Phoenix made a calculated decision to reveal partial truth while maintaining her essential cover. I'm someone who has seen what ethnic hatred can accomplish, she said, meeting Volkov's gaze directly. And I'm someone with the resources to support research that could prevent such horrors from happening again. If that makes me more than an art collector, then yes, I suppose I am. Volkov studied her for what felt like an eternity, weighing Phoenix's words against whatever instincts had kept her alive in a dangerous profession. Finally, she seemed to reach a conclusion. There's a research facility where I work, Volkov said slowly. We're developing applications of synthetic biology that could indeed provide protection against ethnically targeted weapons. But the work is sensitive and the potential investors must be carefully vetted. Phoenix felt her heart hammering against her ribs, but forced her voice to remain steady. What kind of vetting? Background investigations, financial verification, and demonstration of serious commitment to the research objectives, Volkov said. It's not enough to simply provide funding. Investors must understand the implications of the work and be prepared to support its applications. I understand, Phoenix said, though she was beginning to realize that Volkov's research might be more complex than the intelligence briefings had suggested. Was the scientist genuinely trying to develop defensive applications, or was this simply another layer of cover for weapons research? If you're seriously interested, Volkov continued, I could arrange for you to visit the facility and meet with our research team. But such a visit would require absolute discretion and binding agreements about confidentiality. Phoenix felt the operation shifting into a new phase, one that would take her directly into the heart of Kestrel's research facility. It was exactly what the mission required, but it would also place her in extreme danger, surrounded by Volkov's security team and cut off from any possibility of backup or support. I'm very interested, she said, committing herself to a path that would either provide the intelligence needed to prevent catastrophe or result in her death in a Romanian laboratory. Volkov smiled, but there was something predatory in the expression. Excellent. I'll make the arrangements. You should plan a travel to Romania day after tomorrow. I'll provide you with coordinates and additional instructions tomorrow evening. The remainder of the dinner passed in casual conversation, but Phoenix was acutely aware that the dynamic between them had shifted fundamentally. She was no longer simply cultivating a target. She was being actively recruited into Volkov's operation, a process that would subject her to scrutiny that could expose her true identity. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Volkov placed a hand on Phoenix's arm. Isabella, I hope you understand that the research we're discussing involves risks that extend far beyond financial investment. Once you become involved, there will be no possibility of simply walking away. Phoenix met her gaze steadily, drawing on every ounce of training and experience to project confidence rather than the fear that was gnawing at her gut. I've never walked away from anything important in my life, she said. It was, she realized as the words left her mouth, the truest thing she had said all evening. The next day passed in intensive preparation and secure communication with Langley. Phoenix's handlers were pleased with the progress, but deeply concerned about the risks involved in visiting the Kestrel facility. Intelligence suggested that several potential buyers had visited the facility and never been seen again, either eliminated as security risks or absorbed into Volkov's operation. You'll be completely on your own once you enter that facility, Agent Torres warned during a secure video conference. We have no assets in the area, no extraction capabilities, and no way to provide support if things go wrong. Phoenix understood the implications. This was a suicide mission in all but name, a desperate attempt to gather intelligence that could prevent a global catastrophe. If she succeeded, she might save millions of lives. If she failed, she would disappear into a Romanian laboratory, and the world would never know what had happened to her. That evening, Volkov provided the promised coordinates and travel arrangements. Phoenix would fly to Bucharest under her Isabella Marchetti identity, where she would be met by representatives from the research facility. The visit was scheduled to last 3 days, during which she would tour the laboratories, meet with research personnel, and presumably witness demonstrations of the technology's capabilities. One final warning, Volkov said as they concluded their meeting in a discreet cafe near Phoenix's hotel. The facility's security protocols are absolute. Any attempt at unauthorized communication, photography, or data collection will result in immediate termination of your visit and permanent removal from consideration as an investor. Phoenix understood that permanent removal meant something far more final than simply being asked to leave. She was walking into a situation where discovery would mean death, where a single mistake could end not only her life, but any hope of preventing the auction of genocidal weapons. I understand completely, Phoenix said, her voice steady despite the enormity of what she was committing to undertake. As she prepared to leave Vienna and travel to what might be her death in a Romanian laboratory, Phoenix allowed herself one final moment of reflection on the woman she had been just days ago. Sarah Martinez, the barista who had found peace in serving coffee and asking no questions, seemed like a character from someone else's life now. Tomorrow, she would enter the heart of darkness itself, a facility where brilliant minds had created weapons designed to eliminate entire ethnic groups. She would walk among monsters wearing the mask of Isabella Marchetti, while carrying the hopes of humanity as Phoenix. The transformation was complete now. There was no going back, no retreat to the simple life she had tried to build. The world needed saving, and she was the only one who could do it. As Phoenix boarded the flight to Bucharest, she carried with her the knowledge that she was humanity's last hope against a horror that defied imagination. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, but it was also familiar. She was Phoenix, and she was rising from the ashes once again to face whatever flames awaited her in the Romanian mountains. The helicopter swept low over the Carpathian Mountains, its rotors cutting through the thin mountain air as it approached the Kestrel Research Facility. Phoenix, still maintaining her Isabella Marchetti cover, gripped her seat as the aircraft banked sharply around a ridge that concealed the installation from satellite surveillance. Through the window, she caught her first glimpse of what looked more like a military fortress than a research laboratory. The facility sprawled across a plateau that had been carved from a mountainside, its buildings constructed with the kind of reinforced concrete that suggested they were designed to withstand both natural disasters and military assault. Multiple perimeter fences topped with razor wire created concentric circles of security, while guard towers, equipped with automated weapon systems, provided overwatch of the entire complex. Dr. Volkov sat across from Phoenix in the helicopter's passenger compartment, her expression serene despite the military precision of their approach. She had been observing Phoenix's reactions carefully throughout the journey, and Phoenix had the uncomfortable feeling that every gesture and expression was being cataloged for later analysis. "Impressive, isn't it?" Volkov said over the noise of the rotors. "We've invested heavily in security measures. The research we conduct here requires absolute protection from outside interference." Phoenix nodded, forcing herself to project the kind of awed appreciation that Isabella Marchetti would feel when seeing such a sophisticated operation. The level of investment must be extraordinary. This looks more like a government facility than a private research laboratory. "In many ways, it serves the same function," Volkov replied cryptically, "though our objectives are somewhat different from traditional government research programs." The helicopter touched down on a helipad that was immediately surrounded by armed security personnel in military-style uniforms. As Phoenix climbed down from the aircraft, she noted the professional competence of the security team, the way they maintained awareness of potential threats while treating her with the respect due to a valued guest. These weren't hired thugs. They were professional soldiers, probably former Special Forces operators who had been recruited for their skills and discretion. Dr. Volkov led Phoenix through a series of security checkpoints that would have impressed military installers. Biometric scanners, chemical detectors, and full-body imaging systems created multiple layers of screening designed to detect any conceivable threat. Phoenix submitted to the process with the slightly nervous cooperation of a civilian investor, while internally cataloging every security measure for potential exploitation. The interior of the facility was a stark contrast to its fortress-like exterior. Clean white corridors lined with state-of-the-art laboratories created an environment that spoke of serious scientific research rather than weapons development. Phoenix could see researchers in protective suits working with sophisticated equipment, their movements carrying the careful precision of people handling dangerous materials. "Welcome to Kestrel Research," Dr. Volkov said as they entered a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the main laboratory complex. "What you're about to see represents the cutting edge of synthetic biology and genetic engineering." Phoenix settled into a chair at the polished conference table, noting the subtle surveillance equipment that monitored every word and gesture in the room. She was deep inside enemy territory now, surrounded by people who would kill her without hesitation if they discovered her true identity. The weight of her concealed communication device felt enormous, even though it was designed to be undetectable by conventional security measures. Dr. Volkov activated a wall-mounted display that showed a complex molecular diagram. "Traditional biological weapons are indiscriminate," she began, her tone taking on the measured cadence of a scientific lecture. "They kill based on exposure and susceptibility, without regard to the target's genetic background or ethnic identity. Phoenix forced herself to listen with the fascination of someone hearing about cutting-edge science for the first time, while internally recoiling from the casual way Volkov discussed mass murder as if it were simply another research problem to be solved. Our breakthrough has been the development of synthetic organisms that can be programmed to recognize specific genetic markers, Volkov continued. We can now create biological agents that will only affect individuals carrying particular DNA sequences associated with ethnic or racial groups. The implications were staggering. Phoenix was looking at the weaponization of genetics itself, a technology that could enable genocide with surgical precision while leaving other populations completely unaffected. It was the ultimate ethnic weapon, a tool that could eliminate entire peoples while sparing their neighbors. The applications for population protection are obvious, Volkov said, advancing to the next slide. A government could protect its citizens from biological attack by ensuring that any weapons used against them would be ineffective due to genetic incompatibility. Phoenix understood that this was the cover story Volkov used to justify her research, the defensive narrative that allowed her to rationalize creating tools of genocide. But the technology itself was inherently dual use. Anything that could protect one ethnic group could be turned against another with equal effectiveness. "May I see a demonstration?" Phoenix asked, projecting the curiosity of an investor who needed to understand the full scope of what she was being offered. Volkov's expression grew more serious. "The demonstration requires access to our Level 4 biosafety laboratories. The organisms we work with are extremely dangerous, even to personnel wearing full protective equipment. Are you certain you want to proceed?" Phoenix felt her mouth go dry, but forced herself to nod with the confidence of someone who had made difficult decisions before. "I need to understand exactly what I would be investing in." An hour later, Phoenix found herself suited in a full biohazard protection system that made her feel like an astronaut preparing for a spacewalk. The Level 4 laboratory was accessible only through a series of airlocks and decontamination chambers, and the few personnel inside moved with the careful deliberation of people who understood that a single mistake could be fatal. Dr. Volkov guided Phoenix to an observation window that looked into a sealed testing chamber. Inside, 2 laboratory mice had been placed in separate containers, each clearly labeled with genetic information that Phoenix couldn't read from her position. "Both mice have been exposed to the same synthetic organism," Volkov explained, her voice distorted by the protective suit's communication system. "However, they carry different genetic markers that we've programmed the organism to recognize." Phoenix watched in horrified fascination as one mouse began showing signs of distress, while the other remained completely unaffected. Within minutes, the affected mouse was dead, while its companion continued to move around its container normally, apparently unaware that it had been exposed to a lethal biological agent. "The selectivity is absolute," Volkov said with obvious pride. "The organism only affects targets carrying the specific genetic sequence we've programmed it to recognize. To everyone else, it's completely harmless." Phoenix fought down nausea as she watched the demonstration, forcing herself to respond with the enthusiasm of someone witnessing a profitable scientific breakthrough. "Remarkable. The precision is unlike anything I've seen before." "This is only the beginning," Volkov said, leading Phoenix deeper into the laboratory complex. "We've developed targeting packages for 12 different ethnic groups, each optimized for maximum effectiveness against the specific genetic markers that define those populations." They passed through a series of laboratories where Phoenix could see researchers working with materials that she knew represented the potential for unprecedented genocide. Test cultures, genetic analysis equipment, and synthesis apparatus that could produce weapons designed to eliminate millions of people based solely on their ancestry. In one laboratory, Phoenix observed a researcher working with what appeared to be aerosol dispersal systems, devices that could deliver genetic weapons through air conditioning systems or public water supplies. The casual efficiency with which the scientist worked was deeply disturbing, suggesting that these people had become so focused on the technical challenges that they had lost sight of the human cost of their research. The delivery systems are as important as the organisms themselves, Volkov explained, noting Phoenix's interest in the dispersal equipment. We've developed multiple methods for introducing the synthetic organisms into target populations, ranging from direct environmental release to integration into consumer products. Phoenix felt sick as she realized the full scope of Kestrel's capabilities. This wasn't just a weapons program. It was an industrial-scale genocide system that could eliminate entire ethnic groups while appearing to be natural disease outbreaks. The perpetrators could commit mass murder while maintaining plausible deniability, claiming that the deaths were due to natural pathogens rather than deliberately engineered weapons. The tour concluded in a secure conference room where Dr. Volkov presented Phoenix with detailed information about the auction that was scheduled to take place in 48 hours. The buyers would be a carefully selected group of individuals representing governments, terrorist organizations, and criminal enterprises that had both the financial resources and the operational capability to use Kestrel's products effectively. The minimum bid for each targeting package is $50 million, Volkov explained, showing Phoenix a catalog that read like a menu of genocide. However, we expect the final prices to be significantly higher due to competitive bidding among the participants. Phoenix studied the catalog with mounting horror, seeing ethnic groups from around the world listed alongside technical specifications and delivery options. Roma, Tutsi, Uyghur, Kurdish populations, each reduced to a commodity with a price tag and shipping instructions. The buyers have been pre-qualified, Volkov continued, based on their ability to pay and their demonstrated willingness to use unconventional weapons against civilian populations. We're not interested in selling to collectors or academic institutions. Phoenix understood that she was looking at a client list that represented the darkest impulses of human nature, organizations, and individuals who would use genetic weapons to pursue ethnic cleansing with unprecedented efficiency. The auction wasn't just about money. It was about enabling genocide on a global scale. When would delivery take place? Phoenix asked, her voice steady despite the horror of what she was discussing. Within 30 days of payment confirmation, Volkov replied. Each targeting package includes the synthetic organisms, delivery systems, and technical support for deployment. We also provide ongoing consultation services to ensure effective utilization of the products. The clinical language couldn't disguise the reality of what was being offered. Kestrel wasn't just selling weapons. They were providing comprehensive genocide services, complete with technical support and customer service for mass murder. As the briefing continued, Phoenix began to understand the full scope of the threat she had been sent to neutralize. This wasn't a single weapon sale that could be disrupted through traditional intelligence operations. Kestrel had created an entire business model around genocide, a self-sustaining enterprise that would continue producing new targeting packages for any ethnic group that someone was willing to pay to eliminate. The auction itself would take place in the facility's main conference hall, which had been equipped with secure communication systems that would allow remote bidding from participants who couldn't attend in person. Phoenix learned that at least 15 organizations had qualified for participation, representing a combined purchasing power of over $2 billion. Your role as an investor would be somewhat different, Volkov explained as the briefing wound down. Rather than purchasing specific targeting packages, you would be acquiring an equity stake in Kestrel Research itself, providing you with access to our full catalog of products and ongoing research developments. Phoenix realized that Volkov was offering her the opportunity to become a partner in genocide, to profit from the elimination of ethnic groups around the world. The proposal was presented as a business opportunity, complete with projected returns on investment and market analysis that treated human extinction as another profit center. I'm very interested, Phoenix said, the lie coming easily despite her revulsion. What would be the minimum investment for an equity position? $200 million for a 5% stake, Volkov replied without hesitation. However, equity partners are also expected to provide strategic guidance and operational support for expanding our market presence. Phoenix nodded, as if considering the financial commitment, while internally calculating the timeline for the mission. The auction was scheduled to begin tomorrow evening, which meant she had less than 24 hours to gather the intelligence needed to prevent it and somehow communicate that information to her handlers. "I'd like to see the production facilities," Phoenix said, recognizing that she needed to understand Kestrel's manufacturing capabilities in order to provide targeting information for any potential military strike. "If I'm going to invest at this level, I need to understand the full scope of the operation." Volkov agreed to provide a comprehensive tour of the production facilities the following morning, which would give Phoenix the opportunity to map the entire complex and identify the critical nodes that would need to be destroyed to prevent future weapons production. That evening, Phoenix was provided with comfortable quarters in the facility's guest wing, a suite that would have been luxurious if she hadn't known it was surrounded by laboratories producing weapons of mass destruction. The room was clearly monitored, both through obvious surveillance cameras and, undoubtedly, through more sophisticated systems that she couldn't detect. Alone for the first time since arriving at the facility, Phoenix allowed herself to fully process the scope of what she had witnessed. The casual efficiency with which Kestrel's researchers pursued genocide was perhaps more disturbing than the weapons themselves. These were brilliant scientists who had convinced themselves they were engaged in legitimate research, who had compartmentalized the moral implications of their work so completely that they could discuss mass murder as if it were any other scientific challenge. Phoenix activated her concealed communication device for the first time since entering the facility, using a burst transmission protocol that would minimize the chance of detection. The message she sent to Langley was brief but comprehensive, containing the facility's location, layout information, details about the auction participants, and confirmation of the weapon's capabilities. The response came back within an hour, delivered through the same burst transmission system. Her handlers acknowledged receipt of the intelligence and confirmed that strike options were being prepared, but the timeline was extremely tight. The auction had to be prevented, but any military action would need to wait until Phoenix could either extract herself or confirm that all participants were present at the facility. Phoenix understood the implications. She was being asked to remain in place until the last possible moment, gathering final intelligence while surrounded by people who would kill her without hesitation if her true identity was discovered. It was a suicide mission in the truest sense, requiring her to sacrifice her own safety for the greater good. The following morning brought the promised tour of Kestrel's production facilities, a journey through laboratories and manufacturing centers that revealed the true scope of the operation. Phoenix saw synthesis equipment capable of producing weapons in industrial quantities, storage facilities containing enough genetic weapons to eliminate entire populations, and quality control systems that ensured each targeting package would perform exactly as designed. Dr. Volkov guided her through the complex with obvious pride, explaining the technical innovations that had made such precision possible and the quality assurance procedures that guaranteed reliable performance. It was a masterclass in applied genetics, presented by someone who seemed genuinely unaware of the moral horror of what she had created. "We've solved the fundamental challenge of biological weapons," Volkov explained as they toured the main synthesis laboratory. "Traditional agents were too difficult to control, too likely to mutate or spread beyond their intended targets. Our synthetic organisms are engineered for stability and specificity, ensuring they only affect the designated genetic profiles." Phoenix nodded with apparent fascination while internally mapping the facility's critical infrastructure. The synthesis laboratory was clearly the heart of the operation, containing the specialized equipment needed to create the genetic weapons. Destroying this facility would set back Kestrel's operations significantly, but it wouldn't eliminate the knowledge base that made the weapons possible. As the tour progressed, Phoenix began to understand that stopping the immediate auction would only be the first step in a longer campaign against Kestrel's capabilities. The research team included dozens of scientists with the knowledge to recreate the weapons program elsewhere, and the financial resources behind the operation suggested they had multiple backup facilities and contingency plans. The auction began that evening in the facility's main conference hall, a space that had been converted into a sophisticated bidding environment with secure communication links to remote participants around the world. Phoenix found herself seated among individuals who represented the darkest aspects of human nature, people who saw genocide as a tool for achieving political or economic objectives. The atmosphere in the room was surreal, combining the formal protocols of a high-end auction house with the casual brutality of arms dealers discussing weapons of mass destruction.